What do you want? No, really. Tell me exactly what you want. Because I've lived through everything people claim would finally prove extraterrestrials exist. I'm an experiencer, a researcher, an author, a commentator, an abductee. I have what I believe is an extraterrestrial implant. I've been through every level of contact. And none of it means anything. It doesn't explain disclosure. It doesn't clarify my experience. It doesn't move the field forward. All it does is create more doubt in your mind and more confusion in mine. I used to think that with this much evidence, this much contact, this much personal data, at least one chapter would be closed by now. But every time I reach the end of a chapter, the phenomenon opens a new one, before the previous chapter can close. So, before you demand answers from me, before you insist that I explain extraterrestrials, or crafts, or disclosure, I need you to tell me what you think you're asking for. What do you imagine disclosure looks like? A press conference? A classified file? A government admission? A clean, linear story that ties every experience into a neat conclusion? Because I want to tell you plainly, if someone like me, with this level of contact, can't give you the closure you're looking for, then the problem isn't secrecy. The problem is that the phenomenon doesn't behave in a way that allows closure. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't finalize. It doesn't hand out answers. It simply expands and complicates. It rewrites the next chapter before you finish reading the last one, and it forces you to reread the previous chapter if you expect to receive clarity. So, when you ask me for disclosure, or for certainty, or for a final answer, I need you to understand what you're really asking. You're asking for a phenomenon that refuses to resolve itself to suddenly behave like a solved equation. You're asking for a structure that expands, contradicts, and reconfigures to suddenly freeze into a single, digestible truth. You're asking for closure from something that does not easily produce answers. So, before you demand answers, I need you to tell me what you think an answer even is. What shape do you imagine it takes? What form do you think disclosure could possibly occupy? Because if the phenomenon itself refuses to finalize, then what exactly do you believe anyone, experiencer, government, researcher, abductee, could finally disclose? I've known extraterrestrials exist since I was 5. But that doesn't help you. Years of photographic and video capture doesn't help you either. Almost 20 years of studying this phenomenon, and the same questions persist. The same complaints about clarity, resolution, imagination, and interpretation persist. My role was never to make this comfortable for you. My role was never to make it simple, or to hand you a clean narrative. My only real superpower was to tell you the truth as I know it and as I can explain it. Not to make it clear. Not to make it digestible. Not to take you where I've been. It was to open your mind to the reality and your eyes to the possibility. Not that it will be understandable, but that it was real for me, and possible for you. You need to ask yourself, if even the people with the deepest experiences can't produce closure, what exactly do you think disclosure could even look like? So, when you ask me for disclosure, or for proof, or for certainty, you're not asking me about my experiences. You're asking me for something my experiences can't produce. You're asking me to convert a lifetime of contact into a single, clean, human-shaped answer. You're asking me to compress a phenomenon that refuses to be compressed. You want clarity, but the phenomenon doesn't behave clearly. You want resolution, but the phenomenon doesn't resolve. You want a final chapter, but the phenomenon keeps writing new ones. And you want me, or the government, or the researchers, or the abductees, to deliver closure for something that does not to this point produce closure. So, I need you to tell me what you think disclosure even is. What shape do you imagine it takes? What form do you think it could occupy? Because if the phenomenon itself refuses to finalize, then what exactly do you believe anyone could disclose? I ask what you want, not in theory, not in fantasy, but in reality. What do you expect to receive that the phenomenon itself does not generate? If someone like me can't give you the answer you're looking for, then maybe the answer you're looking for doesn't exist in the form you expect. So, what kinds of questions can be answered? These are some of the questions I can answer, but only to a point. I can tell you what I saw, what I photographed, what shape the craft or object had, how it moved or behaved. I can tell you what the entity inside looked like and how or if it communicated and what it did. I could talk about the physical aspects, the sensations, the environmental changes that occurred and the distortions in perception. I can give you data, but I cannot give you disclosure. I can talk about the patterns that repeat across encounters, across years of separation and locations. These are answerable questions because they are descriptions, not explanations. I can explain an image. I can show you the geometry, the shadow behavior, the structural inconsistencies. I can point out the angles that shouldn't exist, the reflections that don't match, the textures that repeat unnaturally. I can show you where the object is, how it interacts with its environment, and why it cannot be dismissed as imagination or misidentification. But what I cannot do is explain the origin of the object or the intent behind the structure. I cannot explain the mechanism that makes it behave the way it does. The image gives you the evidence but does not necessarily give you understanding. So, what does this mean for disclosure? Disclosure is not the release of images. Disclosure is not the release of testimony or classified files. Disclosure would require the phenomenon itself to behave in a way that allows finality, and it doesn't. What it does is give you fragments, patterns, and contact. It gives you evidence, but it does not give you closure. So, when I show you an image, I can explain what's in it, but I cannot explain the phenomenon that produced it. And if I can't, after decades of contact, then I believe that no government can either. So, before you demand disclosure, you need to understand what can be disclosed, and what cannot. You can receive data. You can receive evidence. You can receive testimony. But you cannot receive the final answer you imagine, because the phenomenon does not produce final answers. The story of otherworldly objects and images is only part of the story. When I was reintroduced to the phenomenon in 2008, I didn't understand why it was happening again. I didn't understand why I needed to capture so much of what made no sense: spots of light, colorful illuminations, scrambled shapes, convoluted forms. I didn't want or need that. I wanted something clear, identifiable, undeniable. But what I received instead were images that looked wrong. Images that didn't behave like evidence. Images that didn't fit any category I knew. And for a long time, I thought that meant I was failing to capture the right moment, failing to understand what I was seeing, failing to produce the clarity people demand. Fast forward 2.5 years, and I began to realize that the images were precisely the point. They were presented in the way they exist. They were not meant to be understood immediately. They were meant to be collected. I didn't need to understand them then. Understanding would come later. I only needed to capture enough to recognize patterns, enough to see the structure beneath the chaos. It took 2.5 years before it began to make sense. They were exposing me to their world, their element, their reality. Not the part that fits human expectations. I got to see the part that doesn't. The images were not mistakes. They were not failures or misidentifications. They were the first layer of contact. The sensory introduction. The visual vocabulary of a reality that doesn't translate cleanly into ours. They were showing me how they exist, not how humans want them to appear. And to understand that it would require more than just sight. It would require more than perception or expectation. It would something I wasn't expecting. It would require work. And this is why disclosure cannot be what people imagine. Because the phenomenon doesn't present itself in clean, human-shaped answers. It presents itself in fragments, distortions, illuminations, structures that only make sense in hindsight. The images are real. The experiences are real. But the meaning is not immediate. It is cumulative, layered, and earned. And if the phenomenon introduces itself through complexity, then disclosure, real disclosure, cannot be simple.